Hey, what's up guys, it's Matt with the Movement System. In this video, we're gonna talk about how to train like an athlete. This video is sponsored by Vitruve, more on that later. Okay, so you wanna be more athletic. You wanna increase your speed, your vertical jump, and your overall athleticism. Well, if you wanna do this, you have to figure out which of these two types of athletes you are. Either number one, you're an athlete who's strong but slow, or number two, you're an athlete who's weak but fast. This strong but slow athlete we would consider to be velocity deficient. By contrast, the athlete who is fast but a little bit weak, we would consider to be force deficient. If you can figure out which of these two types of athletes you are, you can choose the right type of training to optimize your performance and your athleticism. So in this video, we're gonna help you figure out which type of athlete you are and exactly how to train based on that information. Okay, so to help you determine which type of athlete you are, I'm gonna use myself as an example first. Over the past 5 years, I've competed in endurance events like triathlons, cyclocross races, bike races, Ironman events. That means that I've done a lot of lifting to support this, a lot of endurance training, but not a lot of athletic and vertical jump training. So therefore my vertical jump has suffered. In order to test this, I actually did a test called a dynamic strength index test with my friend Ben Adina. This is a test on force plates where you jump and then you do a maximal isometric pull and you figure out what percentage of your maximum force you can produce while you're jumping. For me, I ended up producing 46% of my maximum isometric pull force during a jump. Don't worry, even if you don't have force plates to do this test, this will be helpful for figuring out if you are more velocity deficient or force deficient. This means that I was only able to produce about half as much force jumping as I could during strength movements. This means that I'm quite velocity deficient. Some athletes are able to produce 100% as much force jumping as they are during strength movements. We've worked with hundreds of athletes ranging from middle school and high school athletes to professional athletes at the highest level. What we've noticed is that athletes who are more force deficient tend to be a little bit younger, weaker, and naturally bouncy and springy. So these might be your athletes who play a lot of basketball, but they never really get to the gym. They also might just be high schoolers who haven't had a lot of resistance training experience. If that's you, then you might be force deficient. By contrast, a lot of our adult athletes that we work with, or athletes who have been lifting for a long time but haven't necessarily done really high-level plyometric training to support that lifting, tend to be more velocity deficient. Okay, so now that you hopefully have an idea of whether you're more force deficient or velocity deficient, let's talk about how you should train based on that information. In order to figure out the sets, the reps, the loads, and the types of exercises that are gonna be most efficient for you, we need to understand this relationship between force and velocity. Based on the movement, we could be doing an exercise that's very forceful, like a 1 repetition max squat or bench press or leg press exercise. It's very slow but very forceful. That would be all the way up here at the top of the force velocity curve. On the other side of the force velocity curve would be something like sprinting or band assisted jumps, which are very, very fast. Those have very high velocity, but they're so fast that you can't really produce maximum force. There are different types of exercises all along this force velocity curve. And depending on the type of athlete you are, you're gonna choose to do the exercise at one side preferentially more than the other. Our force deficient athletes are going to prioritize all of this training up towards the force side of this force velocity curve. Our velocity deficient athletes are going to prioritize all this training down towards the velocity side of the force velocity curve. Now let's take a look at what that training looks like specifically, and we're going to start with our velocity deficient athletes. Again, these are our athletes who are fairly strong, but they're not that fast. This is the type of training that I'm also prioritizing. For our velocity deficient athletes, there are 3 main types of training that we're going to prioritize. Number 1 is training for power. This is right in the middle of the force velocity curve, and this is when we're going to be using loads that are around typically 60 to 70% of 1 rep max. As an example, let's look at power outputs as the Alabama football team loads at different % 1 rep max. So this is a graph of back squats that the Alabama football team did, and they tracked their power output with different loads. What you can see is power output is peaked or maximized around 65 to 70% of 1 rep max. At this percentage, these football players were able to produce around 2,000 watts of power. By contrast, if they went too light or they went too heavy, their power output decreased. Understanding how much weight to put on the bar to maximize power output is a real advantage for players. Making sure our athletes are doing enough power-based training that's optimizing these percentages is going to allow them to carry over their weight training to being able to hit a player harder and to be able to be overall more athletic. Now, how do we use that graph and that information to actually change our training decisions for our athletes? Well, one way we can do that is comparing power numbers of our high school athletes to the power numbers of college athletes. So for example, on strength day, some of our high school athletes are producing around 700 to 800 watts of power on their strength movements. By being able to see those numbers with the Vitruve velocity-based training device, they can actually see that 700 to 800 watt power output and compare it to the about 1100 watt power output that Alabama football players are getting with similar loading. This helps athletes understand the gap that they need to bridge if they want to get from high-level high school performance to elite-level college performance. There are a lot of ways that this can benefit you. Number one, you can just get your loading right to maximize power output by figuring out your 1 rep max. Maybe that's 315 on a back squat, and then choosing 65% of that, about 205 pounds, and really cranking out fast reps with high intent and maximal bar speed. But if you want to take it one step farther, you can actually get a velocity-based training device like this Vitruve device to measure velocity and figure out your exact wattage for yourself. Vitruve is a velocity-based training tool that you can use in the gym to measure the speed of the bar and the power output of your repetitions. You can use this for yourself or for your athletes if you're a coach working with athletes. By measuring your power output and your bar speed, you can track progress better and see where you stand relative to other levels of competition. Thanks to Vitruve for sponsoring this video, and if you want to check out Vitruve, you can get 10% off with code MOVEMENT. I'll put a link in the description below. Whether you're able to get a device to measure bar speed or not, the biggest thing to improve your training is to maximize intent and try to move the bar as fast as possible. This is true for all of our big compound lifts, whether that's a back squat, front squat, a leg press. When we maximize the speed of the barbell in the gym, we're going to be maximizing the carryover to fast movements like sprinting and jumping and other athletic movements on the field. Now, I know you might be wondering, how many sets and reps should I do? A lot of athletes are used to training 3 sets of 10, 5 sets of 5, things like that. But when we're training power, I actually recommend doing very low repetitions, often just 3 or 4 reps per set and higher numbers of sets. Ideally, what research is showing us is that we want less than a 10% velocity loss between the first rep and the last rep of your set. By doing fewer reps per set and doing more sets, we can keep the velocity high and make sure the neuromuscular output for each repetition is very high. So if your goal is to maximize power output and athleticism, consider around 60 to 70% 1 rep max, something like 6 sets of 3, maximizing the bar speed with very little velocity loss between the first rep and the last rep of your set. All right, now moving on to velocity deficient training method number 2. So again, if you're velocity deficient, you're trying to get more speed, then this is another training technique that you can use, and that is called speed strength. This is when we're using even lighter loads around 30% to 60% of 1 rep max. This isn't very heavy, but the goal here is to move this bar very fast. This can also be used for jumping movements or something like a trap bar deadlift where you're explosive and you're leaving the ground at the end. These ballistic low load movements are often called dynamic effort lifts. If you're measuring your bar speed for these movements, you're gonna shoot for at least 1.0 and up to 1.5 meters per second. This type of loading is really beneficial for athletes, and you'll even see powerlifters using this because of the high neuromuscular output and the demand that it places on the body. In terms of the movements that you're using for speed strength, it can be the same movements, leg press, back squat, trap bar deadlift, bench press, things like that. But I often do recommend adding bands to the barbell to do what's called accommodating resistance. This is where the band increases in tension as you get towards the end of the repetition, and this helps us accelerate through the end of the repetition. This is really important when we're doing fast movements like speed strength. I still recommend high sets, low reps, so something like 8 sets of 2, 6 sets of 3, 5 sets of 4, something like that for these repetitions. And then the third and final velocity deficient training method is speed training. This is when we're taking just our body weight plus or minus 10%. So this would be something like band assisted jumps or dumbbell jumps. You'll often hear this called overspeed and underspeed training, and this is a crucial part of getting faster. We're modifying body weight slightly by plus or minus 10% so that the mechanics of sprinting and jumping stay the same, but with slightly higher or slightly lower loads to provide a slightly different neuromuscular stimulus. I think 4 or 5 sets of 5 to 8 jumps, either assisted or resisted, is a really good place to start with speed training. Okay, so those are all the methods that we want to use if, again, we're velocity deficient and we need to increase speed. For our more force deficient athletes, that's going to look a little bit more like traditional strength training. This could involve true strength training where we're greater than 85% 1 rep max, very high heavy loads that's going to naturally slow the barbell down. We still want to try to move the bar as fast as possible, but if you're measuring the bar speed and you're greater than 85% 1 rep max, you're probably going to see numbers like 0.2 to 0.4 meters per second depending on the lift. Generally, we're looking for less than 6 reps here, so a typical strength set rep scheme would be something like 5 sets of 5. All right, and then the last type of training that you should prioritize as a force deficient athlete is what we would call strength speed. So this is where we're prioritizing strength, but a little bit faster. So we're using percent 1 rep max of around 70 to 85%. Our bar speed is going to be a little bit faster, typically around 0.4 to 0.6 meters per second. I think box squats are a really good exercise to do if you're prioritizing strength speed. Okay, so overall, if you're more velocity deficient, meaning you're already fairly strong, but you lack speed, then prioritize the velocity side of the force velocity curve. 3/4 of your training should be over there where we're focused on faster bar speeds, power output, things like that. That would flip if you're more force deficient. So if you're that young athlete who's not very strong yet, you may spend 3/4 of your time just building strength with the force-based training, and then maybe 1/4 of your time more on speed-based training. Overall, the most important things to remember: maximize intent, make sure you're trying to move the bar as fast as possible and you're challenging yourself with each set, and do your best to take the individualized approach that's going to work best for you. We've worked with hundreds and actually thousands of athletes now at this point, ranging from very force deficient to very velocity deficient, and it's really important that we're taking the individualized approach that's best for them. If you appreciate this scientific approach and this training advice, then make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. If you want to check out our training programs, I'll put a link in the description below to all of our training programs. Also, if you happen to be a coach who is training athletes yourself and you want to learn how to use these scientific principles to write great programs for your athletes, we have a course called Program Design 101. This teaches you exactly how to write great programs for your clients and athletes, and I give you all of the examples of the exact programs that I write and then teach you step by step how to write your own. You can check out Program Design 101 at themovementsystem.com. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.